All right, so let's talk about what might be wrong with the Wegner's illusion of conscious will argument. There's a couple of people who raised objections. Eddy, Nahmias, Bayne. We'll go over each of these objections in order. First one is, well, all right, that's a cool model. But wouldn't it be simpler if the conscious thought was just what it was like to have a brain state? Why not just say some brain state, like brain states have a what it is likeness, and that is our conscious thought. And therefore, the brain state is the causal path of our actions. That is a default view that I think some people come to this argument with, so why not accept this? So there's an intuitive appeal to this that starts to go away once you realize that there's a lot of brain states that we have that we are not conscious of. There's a lot of times you zone out. There's a lot of times where things become automatic. You just don't pay attention. We'll cover this next week when we get into perception. And if we want to think that there is a type identity, just like between brain states and conscious states, then we must have a good reason for why certain brain processes we are aware of and others we are not. And in fact, there's worse cases where the exact same subject, or sorry, two different people in very similar brain states can report different levels of conscious will if you just adjust the outside factors. You can do experiments where after something happens, you ask people to make a perception check to just recall if they remembered authoring something, and you'll get different results depending on whether you ask that or not. Well, okay, cool. Let's say Wegner's right, all of these arguments go through. That actually doesn't affect the bigger questions, the bigger issues. You decided to study at UNR. You decided to sign up for this class. You might decide to quit your job or get married, right? Those are decisions that aren't a single instance. And all of what Wegner's talking about are single instances. So these bigger issues are not at all touched by any of the illusion of conscious will arguments. Although, is that really the case? I mean, like, you can describe them in broader ways, but at every single step along the way, there were smaller decisions. And if you can't justify the causal feeling and the causal action as being the same thing or being related to each other in the right way, for those, then why should you assume that adding a bunch of epiphenomena together yields a true sense of authorship? Since it's impossible to test these long-term things, or at least it's really hard to think about them in both ways of fit the evidence, we shouldn't assume that Wegner's wrong. So the basic view here is Nahmias sounds like he's right, except when you realize that there's no such thing as large decisions that take place over many years. Those are summed up over many smaller time periods. Lastly, Nahmias argues against Wegner that nothing in the brain is completely isolated. In fact, everything connects to everything in some way. Therefore, there's no reason to think that there's going to be a cause of an action and the cause of a feeling of an action causative thoughts. They're all going to be influencing each other again and again, like constantly. It's going to be more dynamic. All right, cool. But that doesn't mean that they're identical either. It's strange because this argument kind of undercuts the first argument. If they can be separated and separated reliably, then we might think that these relationships, like the fact that there's an interrelationship, can go in any number of different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be that causation. Your feeling of will is actually will. Like it can go doubly in favor of the illusion of conscious will. Yeah. Other people have attacked him. Bayne argues that Wegner has conflated two notions of will, right? The experience of will as a feeling versus the experience of conscious will as authorship, intentionality, effort, mental causation. They aren't identical, so we should talk about feelings and intentions as the same thing. All right. Okay, that might be infelicitous phrasing. Wegner's author, like his focus is on the feeling of, like, it's on authorship. If feeling or intentionality fall by the wayside, so much the worse. We have these cognitive feelings like awareness or confusion, and that doesn't seem to undercut the existence of the underlying property, right? Lastly, that same objection from before, why don't all brain states feel authored in the same way, right? So if authorship and the feeling can be severed, the argument goes against authorship, but like we can give the argument again in favor of in talking solely about feelings, and similar brain states don't feel authored. So this is one of those like semantic clarifications where I feel like it just gets more confusing the more you try to separate these ideas. If Bayne has another objection, so when we think about Wegner, he mentions bundle theory a couple of times. He talks about Hume and Buddhist views that perhaps our selves aren't as thorough and unified as we think. Conscious will seems to follow immediately from that, actually, fall away. I mean, if there are no selves, how can their selves will anything? So is he just refuting some view that nobody holds? Or is he refuting a view of personal identity? Is he doing metaphysics in other words? I'm not sure he is. I think that this is one of those where it's motivated by it, but it doesn't depend on the view that the Buddhists hold. I mean, I don't know where you all stand on this. I think it can be very, very difficult to try to like walk in Wegner's worldview for too long, because it might seem to suggest that there's a lot of things that we're not aware of. And what should we do? How do you act if you aren't actually the cause of your own actions? I think you don't really do anything differently. You just realize that there are instances where the world isn't what you thought it was, where you don't behave in the way that you think your ideal self would, and that's fine. You're more likely to forgive yourself for misactions if you realize that there's a lot of circumstances involved, that you're not necessarily like a single agent going throughout all of these. So I don't know. I mean, illusion of conscious will is kind of a fun thing to think about for a while. I recommend you think about it. Don't get hung up on it. It can. I've gotten more comfortable with it, but a lot of people aren't, and that's fine. I do want to leave you all with a advertisement for an event that's happening on Thursday. I'll mention this in class. This is a thing that I host. It's an event that I started or co-started. If you go to thoughtontap.com or thoughtontap.com/event on Thursday at 5:30, you'll see me talking to some experts on health disparities, confronting legacies of health disparities. It should be a really fun event, and I'm looking forward to it. All right, thanks for watching. Next is behavioral economics.